Hello there, guys, and welcome to our next class for the fourth unit. Just like you know, this is a class that is part of the High School and 8 High School. We're working on the subject science and week number 29. Let's start with our presentation and let's go over our end in mind. Students will be able to answer the assessment correctly by actively participating in the live discussion about that topic. Here you have a small summary of the activities that you need to complete. Number 1, read and summarize topic 6.02. Number 2, participate in the live discussion about the topic. And number 3, take the assessment for topic 6.02. And we're going to change things a little bit today. So make sure to upload the summary that you did about the topic to Educativa, all right? So complete the summary and of course include all of the parts, including date, end in mind, title, and then the summary itself, with some additional decoration that has to be uploaded to Educativa. Make sure to do that today. All right, and let's start with our topic, which is relative and absolute time. So, first of all, we have a question. What do scientists do in order to measure an object's or fossil's age? For example, we have a fossil of a sloth. How can they determine when this specimen lived? So, basically, they compare such objects or fossils to more modern relatives. So one of the techniques that they can use is, for example, comparing a prehistorical sloth to a modern sloth, let's say. So depending on how many changes it has suffered, because you can actually notice that this prehistoric sloth is gigantic, compare, of course, to the sloths that we have nowadays, which are quite little. So they can determine how much time it required this specific sloth to change its body and, of course, its genetical composition. That is just one of the techniques they use, and we are going to go over the presentation and study some more. And now we are going to talk about fossil formation. When we talk about fossil formation, there are different classifications from there. The first one that we can have are molds. And they look like imprints of organisms that once lived, like a silhouette on the ground. So, and I prefer if you go to Agilex as well to look at the pictures that you have right there. But in relation to mold, let's suppose that you have a shelf and you put it on the ground. So you're going to notice that the silhouette of that shelf is going to stay right there. So that's basically a mold. It's like a silhouette of what once was at a certain place. We also have casts, and a mold is filled with sediment, which generates a representation of the organism. So when we talk about molds, let's say that it's only half of the organism or the thing that was once there, or it's just the bottom section of it. But when we talk about cast, it's like a complete image or a complete figure of the object or the animal that habitated that location. We also have something called petrification. It happens when an organism is invaded by a rock material. So this is quite interesting because what happens is that once there was specifically, let's say, a solid object like bones, or we can say a shell from one prehistorical organism. So in some occasions, what happens is that the rock materials start invading and coming inside that we have right there, like bones, shells, or other hard material. So at some point, like the organism is going to be mixed up with rocks. So that combination of the organism among with rocks is called petrification. We also have crystallization, and it takes place when insects get stuck inside stick saps of ancient trees. A couple of months ago, I was watching a documentary which was extremely interesting. And it was about a cockroach that was found in one of these saps of ancient trees. And what was interesting was that this cockroach was fossilized since the era of dinosaurs. Imagine that means that cockroach actually has like 10 million years. So it existed 10 million years ago, but since it was crystallized, then scientists were able to analyze it. And what's even more interesting is that the composture or the genetical information of that specific cockroach that lived 10 million years ago is not so different to the cockroaches that we have nowadays. It's pretty much the same. And besides that, we also have freezing. And extruding cold preserves bodies and organisms. Again, a couple of months ago, I was watching another documentary about some bodies that were found. I don't remember specifically, but it was a region on Earth that was extremely cold. So what happened was that some people were hiking at that specific location, and they found some bodies in the snow, and they were super afraid because they thought that a murder was committed in there. So they called the authorities and everything. But when they reached that place, they noticed that the bodies were somewhat different to what humans actually look like today. The head of the specimen, specifically because it was a man, it was a little bit bigger than usual. And then that called the scientists' attention. And when they started to analyze that body, they found that actually that wasn't, well, that was a part of the human ancestors, let's say. So it was part of some old tribes that used to live at that region. And one of them was killed with, I guess it was a bow or something. But the thing is that since the body fell inside a body of snow, then the body of snow and the cold temperatures actually help to preserve that organism throughout time. And lastly, we have trace fossils, the remains of an organism. And an example of these trace fossils can be, for example, the T-Rex that you have right here as a background image. So the bones of the T-Rex that have been preserved through time can be called a trace fossil. All right, and now we have another thing, which is relative dating. Scientists base their investigation in the rock cycle, since it has always happened in the same way throughout the world's history. Several rock layers, or as they are called, strata, are added to each other with the pass of time, and attaching more and more let's say like labels of ground is called superposition. Superposition because you have one layer of ground, then you attach another layer of different rocks, another layer, and since they are coming above each other, that's what we call superposition. And this is something that we have studied before. So just like you can notice right here, you have another mountain, and you can notice that it actually has like several layers of rocks. And they are all quite distinctive. So since scientists already understand the rock cycle and how much time it takes for each one of these layers to form, they can actually study them. And in case they found a fossil in one of the first and main layers right here at the top, they are going to consider it to be somewhat more actual or more modern, let's say. And if they find a fossil that is right at the bottom layers, they are going to consider it to be way older than the ones at the top, because the layers at the bottom are the first ones that were formed during world's history. All right, and now we're going to continue talking about changing strata. Sedimentary rocks follow the principle of original horizontally. It basically explains that rocks are deposited in layers due to a simple physics principle. The rocks at the top of an elevated surface will go down due to weathering and form a new rock layer. The motion of plate tectonics and the flow of magma can also generate pressure, chemical, and physical changes. So we have an example right here in the image to the right. So let's suppose that you have a mountain, right? So at the top of the mountain, there are several rocks and several materials. So what happens is that whenever there is a lot of rain, then all of those rocks that were at the top are going to come down to the bottom layers or bottom sections of that mountain. So little by little, they're going to start getting stocked up, and they're going to pile up and form like a single layer. And basically, that's the physics principle that there is more potential energy, is what we call it in physics, that the rocks at the top are more likely to go down with another interaction, like, for example, with rain. And they are going to form new layers of ground with the pass of time. But that's not the only thing that can actually change or generate these layers on the ground. We can also talk about pressure, because the more rocks there are, the heavier the amount of energy that rocks are going to be being exposed to. Chemical and physical changes that can be done thanks to the exposure of magma. All right, and now I have a small exercise for you. So please complete the strata analysis on page number 2. You are going to find that in Agilix. So go to page number 2 and complete that exercise right there. All right, I hope that you are done so we can continue talking about index fossils. So geologists have identified that there are certain rocks that were formed during the same period of time. That has helped them to identify how long ago the fossils found inhabited Earth. And you should watch out for rocks. They might contain fossilized specimens. So, there was a very interesting video in Agilix, and it's right after the exercise that you completed before. I think she is a geologist, and if I'm not mistaken, she found a rock of a fossil that was under a tree. And she noticed that specific rock had a very old fossil. So if you are interested into watching that video, you can go ahead and do it to expand a little bit your knowledge and curiosity on rocks and fossils. Okay, and this is what I was telling you about. There are certain rocks or certain materials that are usually formed with the pass of time. And the scientists have already determined when each one of the layers formed. So you can notice that right here we have some examples of some of the rocks or layers that were formed during the Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, or Pennsylvania. That's a difficult word. Eras, and which one of the layers formed. For example, when we talk about some of the subclassifications of the Mesozoic era, including Jurassic and Triassic, you're going to find that there were formed a younger Navajo sandstone. In Jurassic, also Kayenta formation took place, and so on and so forth. If you would like to expand this a little bit more, you can just pause the video and take a deeper look into this image. Let's go with absolute dating. In radiometric dating is when scientists can determine the age of a rock or substance by analyzing the rate of radioactivity. There is another term that is beta decay. Atoms become unstable with time, such as carbon. They become radioactive since their structure is not balanced anymore. We have something called an isotope, which is an atom with a variation of neutron in its nucleus. So when there are more or less neutrons inside the nucleus of an atom, it will become unstable and will become an isotope. So basically what scientists do is that they analyze a sample of the material that they are studying, and actually they relate it to this table right here. So for example, a number of half-lives, which means different times in years. So in the first year, the carbon in grams is going to have 14 grams, let's say. But with a lot of time, let's suppose that 3 number of half-lives have gone through, which means 17,190 years, then carbon is going to be changed from 100 grams to only 12.5 grams. And of course, it will become an unstable isotope. Based on that, scientists can determine how much that carbon has been at a certain location. So that's it for me for now, guys. And remember to go back to the activities section to complete everything you have to do today. And I will see you in a couple of minutes during our Zoom sessions. Goodbye, everyone, and always take care.